Today, a woman I had never seen before repeated a sentence I wrote in this diary last night. Not approximately, word for word. I've checked 3 times. That's probably why I'm writing this down now, even though it's nearly midnight and I have to say Mass at 7 in the morning. Her name is Margaret Doyle, 43 years old, a widow. Around 4 in the afternoon, her brother Patrick came to the parish house and asked if a priest could visit his sister. I asked if she was ill. He said, "Not in any simple sense of the word." People often speak to priests like that, as if we derive pleasure from mysteries. I asked him to explain normally. He said Margaret hadn't slept for nearly a week, barely ate, and several times in the middle of the night she went outside and stood in the backyard. Yesterday, a neighbor found her there barefoot around 3 in the morning. I asked about a doctor. He said a doctor had already come. I asked what the doctor said. Nerves. That word has become very convenient in recent years. If a doctor doesn't know what's wrong, nerves. If a wife cries, nerves. If a man can't sleep after the war, nerves. If a child won't speak, nerves. If a priest wakes up at 3 in the morning because he's dreaming about France again, that's probably nerves too. I agreed to go. The Doyles live south of Arsenal Street, in a small brick house squeezed between 2 nearly identical ones. There's nothing ominous about it worth writing down. No scary house, no black windows. A child's bicycle stood on the porch. A man was raking leaves next door, and the smell of boiled potatoes came from the kitchen. Margaret sat by the window. The first thing I noticed, she didn't look frightened. She looked exhausted. Those are different things. A cup of coffee sat next to her, with a film on the surface. It had been there a long time. I introduced myself. She looked at my collar and said, "Patrick thinks I need a priest. And you?" "I think I need sleep." That was the most sensible thing I'd heard all day. I sat across from her. Her husband Daniel died in February, heart attack, 47 years old. She told me without tears. After his death, things were normal for a few months. She returned to work in the spring, started visiting her sister again in the summer. 3 weeks ago, the sounds began. Soft tapping in the bedroom wall, only at night. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. Patrick opened part of the wall. Nothing. They called a man to check the pipes. Nothing. I asked if the sound occurred when other people were in the house. Yes, Patrick heard it. A neighbor heard it. The doctor heard it once. This actually reassured me. Hallucination became less likely, but the house became much more likely. Old houses speak. Pipes knock. Wood moves. Rats get into places people swear they can't. A person who wants to find a miracle underestimates the ingenuity of plumbing. I told her that. Margaret even smiled. Then she said, "It's not about the wall, Father." I already knew the conversation was about to get worse. She said that a few days after the knocking started, she began waking up with thoughts about Daniel. Not dreams, but thoughts, precisely. Sentences he'd once said. Ordinary things. "Close the back door. Don't forget the milk. Your sister's going to be late again." I asked if she heard his voice. No, she insisted there was no voice, just a phrase already in her head at the moment of waking. I explained that after losing someone, memory can do strange things, especially with sleep deprivation. She said, "I know." Then she looked at Patrick. He left the room. She leaned toward me. What if I remember something Daniel never said? I asked what exactly. She was silent for a long time. Then, "He tells me there's something in the basement." Here I made a mistake. I asked what. I should have asked why she thought it was Daniel, but I asked what. She replied, "I don't know. He says, under the stairs." I asked to see the basement. Patrick returned with a flashlight. The basement contained exactly what basements usually contain: jars, old newspapers, tools, the smell of coal and dampness. Under the wooden stairs stood two boxes, one with Christmas decorations, one with Daniel's old clothes. Margaret didn't want to touch it. Patrick opened it. Shirts, shoes, a work jacket. Nothing more. I even felt relief, not because I expected something supernatural, but because sometimes you start to fear not the thing itself, but the expectation of the thing. We went back upstairs. I told Margaret I wanted to speak with her doctor if she'd allow it, and that she needed to sleep. Not pray all night, not wait for knocking, just sleep. She agreed. Before I left, I said a short prayer with her. Nothing happened. I'm deliberately recording this. The lamp didn't flicker. The table didn't shake. Margaret didn't speak in another voice. We just prayed. On the porch, Patrick thanked me and said he'd been afraid I'd start talking about the unclean one. I replied, "Your sister needs a doctor and several nights of sleep. If the devil has started working through old plumbing pipes, things in hell must be pretty bad." Patrick laughed. So did I. That should have been the end of it. But around 7 in the evening, Margaret came to the church, alone. I was just closing the side door. She stood on the sidewalk, without a coat. I asked what happened. She said, "He started again." I wanted to walk her home, but she grabbed my sleeve. "Not Daniel." "Who?" She didn't answer, just looked at me. Then she said, "You don't sleep either." I thought Patrick might have told her something. He doesn't know about the war. At least, I never told him. I asked what she meant. She said, "France. You leave one man there every time." I asked her to stop, quite sharply. She pulled her hand away. For a few seconds, I felt ashamed. I asked who told her I'd been in France. She said no one. I asked about Patrick. No. About Father Brennan. No. About anyone from the parish. No. She started to cry, quietly. I was almost certain someone had told her. Army chaplain isn't a state secret. Maybe she'd seen an old parish bulletin. Maybe Daniel knew someone who knew me. Maybe. Then Margaret wiped her face and said, "I don't know who that man is, Father." "What man?" "The one you didn't pull out." I didn't tell her his name. I've never told anyone here, not even Brennan, especially Brennan. Margaret looked past me into the empty church and said, "Peter Walsh." I drove her home. Called Dr. Levin. He'll come in the morning. Patrick promised not to leave her alone. After that, I returned to my room and got out this book. Last night, I wrote here about the dream. First time in months I've written it in detail. I'm not going to rewrite the whole page. One sentence is enough. Last night I wrote, "In my dream, I leave Peter Walsh in France every time." Today, Margaret Doyle said, "You leave one man there every time." That could be coincidence. The name is harder. But even for the name, there could be an explanation. I'll find it tomorrow. There has to be one. I just checked my room door. The lock works. The diary lay in the bottom drawer of my desk all day. The key was with me. And that, too, must have an explanation. What bothers me most is something else. When I opened the diary, between yesterday's page and this one, lay a small lump of dry, dark earth. I could have brought it on my shoe, shaken it off my clothes, not noticed it before. So I threw it in the wastebasket. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in many years. When we buried Peter near the field hospital in France, the earth was exactly that color. I understand how ridiculous that sounds. That's exactly why I'm not crossing it out. Today, I found the earth. That's good news, at least for about a minute. After morning mass, I returned to my room and emptied the wastebasket onto a newspaper. Yesterday's lump lay among scraps of paper, 2 matches, and an apple peel. I felt like a fool. Also good news. It's good to feel like a fool sometimes, especially a priest. Otherwise, it's easy to decide God appointed you chief of mysteries. I broke the lump apart with my fingers. Ordinary, dry earth. Dark, fine. No smell to carry me across the ocean, no French field inside, no message from the dead. Just Earth. I put it in an envelope. I don't know why. At 9, Dr. Levin arrived. His name is Samuel Levin, and if I ever fall ill with anything more serious than pride, I want him treating me. He's around 50, always looks like he's late for his next patient, though he never rushes. He has a habit of looking at a person for a few seconds before answering. Most people can't stand the silence and start talking more. Maybe that's why he knows more about people than many priests. We met at the Doyles. I told him everything. Almost everything. I didn't tell him about Peter Walsh, not proud of that. If I truly believe Margaret is Bill, hiding part of her behavior is foolish, but saying Peter's name to someone else turned out harder than I thought. Samuel listened about the insomnia, the nighttime trips to the yard, the thoughts about her deceased husband and the knocking. Then he asked, "What exactly frightened you?" I said I didn't say anything frightened me. "That's why I asked," he said. "I've never liked doctors." We went inside. Margaret was asleep. That was the first change. Patrick sat in the kitchen looking like he hadn't slept instead of her. Samuel had given her a small dose of sedative after my call. He didn't want to leave her another night without sleep. She'd slept almost 7 hours. Patrick said there was no knocking, not once. I liked that. Samuel didn't. He asked if Patrick had also slept. Patrick said yes. "Then you don't know if it knocked," Samuel said. Doctors have an unpleasant habit of ruining good conclusions. We had coffee. Patrick told me about Daniel, and here appeared the first real crack in yesterday's story. Daniel Doyle didn't work where I'd assumed. I'd imagined a factory. In fact, most of his life he repaired houses, pipes, floors, wooden partitions, stairs, including his own. "Did he build the basement himself?" I asked. Patrick nodded. About 15 years ago, Daniel rebuilt part of the stairs and made a storage space beneath them. I looked at Samuel. He already understood. We went downstairs. This time, we didn't look in the boxes. I knelt and knocked on the wooden panel under the stairs. In several places, the sound was dull. In one, hollow. Patrick brought tools. Within 5 minutes, we removed the board. Behind it was a narrow space, and in it, a middle box. Margaret was right. There really was something under the stairs. I felt that brief, shameful cold in my stomach that people later like to call a premonition. There was no premonition. I simply remembered yesterday's words. Patrick pulled out the box. It was locked. We carried it to the kitchen. When Margaret woke around 11, she saw it on the table, and she cried. Didn't scream, didn't cross herself, didn't say she knew. She just sat down. Samuel asked if she'd seen the box before. She shook her head. Patrick found a ring of old keys among Daniel's things. The third one fit. Inside were papers, receipts, 2 old photographs, a watch, 3 letters tied with string, and money, $187. For Margaret, that was a lot. She looked at them for a minute, then said, "Oh, you old fool," and she started laughing through tears. Right then, I thought it was all over. Daniel had hidden money. Maybe he'd once told her and she'd forgotten. Maybe he'd mentioned it before he died when she was exhausted. Maybe she'd seen him hide something 15 years ago and the memory remained somewhere deep. After his death, with the insomnia and the knocking, the old memory returned as a new thought, under the stairs. This wasn't a dead man's voice. This was a living woman's brain. I even felt satisfaction. This is why you have to be careful. If yesterday I'd come here with holy water and a ready answer, today I might be telling someone how a dead husband's spirit showed his wife a hiding place, and people would believe it. They love stories more than truth. Sometimes priests do too, especially priests. Samuel examined Margaret. Then we went out on the porch. He said her condition didn't surprise him. Grief, prolonged insomnia, exhaustion, possible obsessive thoughts, maybe brief episodes of confusion. He wants to see her a few more times. I asked about the knocking. The house. Very scientific. Thank you. And that it stopped last night? Samuel looked at me. Matthew, if it starts again, you'll say I was wrong. If it doesn't, you'll say we found the box. That's how superstitions survive. They win either way. I said he sounded like a priest. He replied, "Don't insult me." I stayed a while longer. Margaret wanted to confess. I said she could do that at church later. She insisted, not because of the box, but because of Daniel. After confession, I can't write what she said, not even here, especially here. But I can write what happened after. When we finished, Margaret asked, "Do you think I'm crazy now?" "No. The doctor thinks so." Dr. Levin didn't use that word. Doctors don't need it. They have longer words. She laughed. Then I told her that, in my opinion, her brain was trying to deal with too many things. She asked, "What about Peter?" I didn't answer. She looked at me as if she herself regretted saying the name. I closed the kitchen door. Patrick was in the yard. "Where did you hear that name?" "I don't know." "You said it yesterday." "I remember." "Did someone tell you?" "No." "Did you read about me?" "No." "See photographs?" "No." "Talk to someone from the church?" "Father, I didn't even know your name until yesterday." A person can remember a name after hearing herself say it once. The only problem is that Margaret insists she doesn't remember where it came from. I walked back to church. I could have taken the streetcar but didn't want to sit among people. At 4:40, I went down to the church basement, not to pray, but to search. That's where old bulletins, documents, and things no one throws away are stored. I wanted to check if my name and military service had ever been mentioned in printed materials. If Margaret was here for a funeral 10 years ago, maybe she picked up a bulletin. Maybe Daniel did. Maybe someone in the family. I needed to find a path by which information could have reached her. I found it, at least part of it. In the parish bulletin for August 1945, there's a brief note about my return from service. It says I was an army chaplain in France and Germany. That's all. Peter Walsh isn't mentioned, but now France is explained. That's enough. Someone could have seen the bulletin. Someone could have told Margaret. Memory could have hidden the source. That happens. The name will have an explanation too. I was sitting on the floor among boxes when I heard footsteps. It was Father Charles Brennan. He asked what I was doing. I replied, "Looking for proof that I'm an idiot." He said, "You didn't have to go this far down for that." Charles is 12 years older and considers that sufficient reason to act like my older brother. Unfortunately, I allow him to. He sat on a box. "Doyle." I asked how he knew. "Patrick called yesterday." That irritated me more than it should have. "What did he tell you?" "That his sister was acting strange, that you went to see her." "Anything else?" "That you came back pale." "I didn't come back to him after that." Charles thought. Then I must have added the paleness myself. I told him about the box, the money, the insomnia, Samuel, the bulletin. About Peter, no. Charles listened, then said, "So everything's fine?" "Seems like it." "Then why are you sitting in the basement?" I replied, "It's cooler down here." He looked at me the same way Samuel did. I'm starting to suspect a conspiracy of people over 50. Before leaving, Charles stopped on the stairs. "Matthew." "What?" "If you ever decide you've seen something truly bad, don't keep it a secret." I laughed. "What am I supposed to see?" "I don't know." "Then very helpful advice." He didn't smile. "I'm serious." That was strange. I asked why he was saying this. He shrugged. "Because you have a bad habit of deciding you can carry things alone." Then he went upstairs. I stayed about 10 more minutes, not because of Margaret, but because of Peter. There are things Charles is right about. I returned to my room around 8, ate a cold dinner, read a few pages, tried not to think. At 9:15, the phone rang. Patrick. Margaret was feeling much better. She'd eaten, no knocking. He thanked me. I said to thank Samuel. We were already saying goodbye when I asked, "Patrick, have you ever heard the name Peter Walsh?" Silence. Then, "No, who is that?" I said, "No one." After the call, I took out the envelope with the earth, I don't know why, put it on the table, stared at it. Then I felt ashamed. I put on my coat and walked back to the church. The earth by St. Margaret's is dark, especially where it's been watered recently. I scooped some by the south wall, brought it to my room and placed it next to the one from the diary. They're almost identical. I even laughed. That's all there is to it. The lump could have stuck to my shoe. I walk on that earth every day. It could have fallen on my clothes, on the table, in the drawer. I just didn't notice. No France. No Peter. I picked up both envelopes to throw them away, and that's when I noticed it. In the old earth, there was something white, very small. I thought it was a pebble. I pulled it out with the tip of my pen. It was a piece of lime or plaster. At least I thought so. On one side, there was a thin blue stripe. I know that blue paint. Not because it's special, quite the opposite. We used it to paint the walls of the field hospital near Reims in the spring of 1945. I helped. We had a few cans of army paint left, and one medic decided blue walls would make the place look less like a place where people died. They didn't. Peter lay by that wall. I sat next to him on the floor. He scratched the plaster with his fingers when the pain started. When we carried him out, there was white dust with blue paint under his nails. I remember that because I washed his hands before the burial. I just wrote the last 4 paragraphs. I read them back, and they sound like delirium. Good. That means I still understand that. The little piece is lying in front of me. But now I'm not thinking about it anymore. I'm thinking about Peter Walsh. Last night I wrote his name for the first time in years. Didn't say it aloud. Didn't tell Charles. Didn't tell Samuel. Didn't mention it in parish records. I checked. The old bulletin has France, has Germany, has my return from service. Peter isn't there. Nowhere. Except one place. This diary. Last night I wrote, "In my dream, I leave Peter Walsh in France every time."
Today, Margaret Doyle said his name. So if we set aside things for which I'm not yet inclined to seek theological explanations, the answer must be very simple. Someone read this page. And if that's true, the earth no longer seems so interesting. It could have gotten here by accident, fallen off a shoe, been in the drawer a long time, and I only noticed it precisely when I was ready to see France in it. The human brain loves to finish sentences for us, especially when we're frightened. Peter is different. His name couldn't have accidentally stuck to someone's soul. I checked the lock. It works. That doesn't mean the door can't be opened. It only means that the person who could have done it either had a key or time or a strong enough reason to take the risk. Margaret? I don't think so. I've seen her. She can barely stand after several nights without sleep. Her behavior could be acted, of course, but then you'd have to assume she's a very good actress who chose a very bad role. That leaves Patrick. I don't like that I wrote that. I like even less how well he fits. He lives next to Margaret, knows when she sleeps, knows the house, can move through the basement, kitchen, bedroom without arousing suspicion. A knocking in the wall heard only from time to time is much easier to explain by a person inside the house than by a dead husband. Patrick came for the priest. Patrick was nearby almost the whole time. And if someone wanted to convince everyone that Margaret was gradually losing her mind, bringing a doctor and a priest to her would be far from the worst way to do it. On the contrary, it would be very convincing. I know what I'm doing now. I'm taking a few facts and building from them a person who may not exist. I can already guess what Samuel would say about that. But there's another question I still haven't asked. What happens to Daniel and Margaret's house if Margaret dies? I don't know. I'll find out tomorrow. And I also want to know whether Patrick had any opportunity to get into the parish house between the evening of October 6th and 7 o'clock last night. I want to know if he's ever been in the parish house. I want to know who he knows, especially anyone who served in Europe. Maybe none of this will lead anywhere. Maybe tomorrow I'll be ashamed of every word I just wrote about a man who's simply afraid for his sister. I hope so, because there's one possibility I like much less, that Patrick has nothing to do with it, that no one entered my room, that no one opened this diary. And then I'll have to ask the question again.
How did Margaret Doyle know the name Peter Walsh?